What a beautiful morning it is today. So thanks for the beautiful weather to have everyone come, and thank you for your attendance today. Good morning, distinguished guests and valued sponsors and members. Welcome to the 2022 ALCC Business Breakfast. We're absolutely delighted to see you here this morning. On behalf of the Board of Directors, we thank you for attending today. We'd like to acknowledge our partner Arab Bank Australia and our diamond sponsor TradeLink and our platinum, gold and silver sponsors. I'd like to ask the President of the ALCC, Mr. Salim Nicholas OAM, to the stage to say a few words.
Good morning and welcome. A special welcome to our Consul General, Mr. Charles Macaron, our guest speaker and all the attendees today. Let me start by saying that our thoughts, prayers and support turn to those impacted by the floods in Sydney, northern New South Wales and southern Queensland, as they deal with the tragedy over the past 2 weeks and the rebuilding process to come. 2020 to 2022 will go down in history as a period of many disasters, but also one of focus on things that really matter: family, connections, and supporting one another. One of the main benefits of the Chamber is the interaction and networking opportunities of like-minded companies and individuals. The Chamber's success is based on your continued engagement. Because of this support, we celebrate many successes in our activities at home and abroad. These are briefly highlighted by the activities and functions you are all aware of, and including breakfast or evening seminars on relevant and current topics, webinars, and our famed business luncheon and annual business award dinner. And the list goes on. But we are also thankful for the efforts of support to the Lebanese people during that unforgettable blast a few years ago, and the economic challenges the country has faced since. We continue to be engaged on the ground to help where we can. We also wish to acknowledge that during the pandemic, the Chamber continued to work without reservation and retained our strong sponsorship base, and new supporters have joined the ranks as partners and sponsors. We are also proud to announce the ALCC will have a new permanent location in Anfield, and planning works are underway with the new fit-out to begin soon. We look forward to having you all visit once completed. We thank you all for your efforts and time today. We look forward to seeing you all at all our events, and please feel free to touch base with myself, the directors, as you wish. Welcome everybody.
Thank you, President, and we look forward to the next chapter of the ALCC under your guidance. Ladies and gentlemen, we're privileged to have our guest speaker, Mr. Craig James, Chief Economist at Commsec, who will share his important views on the economy and living with COVID. Some facts about our speaker today. Craig is married with 3 20-something-like children and currently lives just north of Sydney. His interests outside of work is keeping fit, which includes running and weights. We're looking forward to Craig attending the 2032 Olympics, I think in Brisbane, I think he was saying. So, his current role is Chief Economist of Commsec, interpreting the big picture economic and financial trends for customers, clients and staff. Commsec is known for innovative, user-friendly reports including State of the States, the Commsec iPhone Index and Commsec Home Size Report, as well as providing presentations to staff and clients and commentaries on financial and economic trends. Craig appears regularly in the electronic and print media. Craig has worked in banking, finance and journalism for 42 years and holds both a bachelor and master's degree in commerce economics from the University of New South Wales. In February 2012, Craig was appointed as adjunct professor at Curtin Business School in Perth. We welcome Craig to the stage.
Well, thank you very much. They gave me the microphone and the clicker earlier in the piece, so I can walk around and chat before I get up here. It's good to be here with you this morning. And now you've got to be gentle on me this morning because this is the first time that I've spoken to a live audience for quite some time. It's good to have people in the room. Sort of generally, so when sort of I've been speaking at some Teams events and Skype events and Zoom events and whatnot, which is fine. You get to reach a lot of people, but I think everyone in the room values the contact, sort of individuals around. Chamber of Commerce, I believe, are very, very important because it's an opportunity for you to get together with other people and just say, how's business? What's working for you? What's not working for you? Sort of how's things to go? What do you find are the tricks to be able to negotiate to the current environment? So hopefully you've done that outside in terms of your networking. Hopefully you'll get the opportunity after I get off the stage to be able to do that sort of as well, to make sure you keep the networking sort of going. Certainly I'm here sort of at the request of the Commonwealth Bank, so I'm going to do a bit of a spiel for the Commonwealth Bank. There's a number of the bankers around the room, so if you're wanting to do anything at the moment, I understand they're super busy, so it doesn't matter about that. So if you want things done, they'll drop whatever they're working on and sort of work on your proposition. So I understand my competitors are in the room as well. Sort of, it's good to have for healthy competition, sort of, but I'll just put in a special plug for the Commonwealth Bank. Living with COVID. Now, before I get too much in the presentation, so let's put up this slide. This is the disclaimer slide, the legal slide. So probably the most important slide across the room today. And the general rules apply. I haven't whipped around the room. I don't know your own personal circumstances, so it's very much of a general nature. You probably knew that already, but so I've got to have that so whenever I speak. Now, the good news is this is not going to be a dull or dry argument. I understand not too far away is breakfast coming up. And that's probably one of the most important things of the day. So listening to me, well, look, you haven't got to look up at the stage so too much to be able to see so what I'm doing. Because if you want a copy of the slides today, I have no problem in those slides being made available to you. So certainly see the organisers if you want copies of the slides today and you believe they're of use to you, and you can share those with your business partners, with your staff and the like, sort of hopefully so that will be a benefit to you. I was asked earlier in the piece, sort of when I was having sort of chats outside, am I going to be able to say something new, something sort of different? Well, you'll just have to wait, won't you? You'll just have to watch the information as they come through and see whether they come up with anything new or anything different. But I think the most important thing when you hear an economist is to be able to ask one simple question. So what? What does this mean for me? What does this mean for my customers, my clients? What does it mean for my friends and family? If you ask that super important question, then I think you're starting to get real value up. So when you see the slides, ask yourself internally. You can get time for questions and answers later on in the piece, but ask in terms of your own mind, is there some sort of a call to action for me to be able to do in terms of my own business and in terms of my interaction with my customers and clients? Well, we're in a living with COVID environment. We tried to beat COVID, didn't we? We tried to suppress it, then we tried to eradicate it, and now we're just learning to live with COVID. And this is an entirely different sort of environment. And it's not going to be an easy challenge because clearly people are getting back to work. Things are starting to progress quite nicely. There's a lot of activity across the Australian economy at the moment. And eventually interest rates are going to have to rise. So it's not going to be an easy process, sort of going from a period where we've got maximum velocity in terms of monetary and fiscal policy to a time when so some of that stimulus is being unwound. Of course, we've got people which are trying to get back to work. They might get sort of COVID, so that means that puts them off for about 7 days. And that's why we're seeing sort of so much issues with the supply chain at the moment. We've got people sort of wanting to buy things and to build things, wanting to do activity, but the goods that are necessary for that aren't being supplied because production is still constrained and it's constrained by COVID. But this was going to change over time. Eventually supply will rise to meet demand. And the two things that work in economics is supply and demand determining price. You can forget everything else. It's all about supply and demand determining price. Supply will eventually pick up to meet demand, and that's what the Reserve Bank's watching very, very carefully. the Reserve Bank governor knows that it's not going to last forever. Eventually people will be getting back to work, COVID cases will be coming down, production will be starting to pick up, and there will be more plentiful goods out there to be able to deal with. Certainly it's not just COVID that we've got to deal with in terms of the current environment, it's the war in Ukraine. But again, so the same sort of things apply in terms of the war. There's two outcomes really in terms of the war, that it can continue to go on or escalate, or that eventually that we could have a ceasefire. And overnight there was some degree of hope that perhaps we could have a ceasefire, perhaps we could have a resolution of the conflict. And you've got to ask the so what question. So what happens then, if the war ends? Well, what we saw overnight is the price of oil was down by 6% in the space of one night. And that just shows you what can happen, when this news comes out. So it's a volatile environment. Things can go either way. We've just got to stay on top of it, so keep on asking that question. Okay, this is the latest news. How does this apply to me? We're going to hear a lot today about prices and in terms of wages and the job market and interest rates, because it all gets back to that. We've been running super stimulatory settings, but we won't be needing those stimulatory settings as we go through this through this year. This is some of the. This is a chart which I've just pinched from the Reserve Bank. It was in one of Governor Lowe's recent speeches, and he's saying, look, we don't know in terms of supply chain how long it's going to take in terms of the goods supply to eventually pick up. But there are some encouraging signs. It looks as though we've seen some peaks, and indeed you just got to watch the signals. Watch the signals very, very carefully to make sure that you're not behind the curve. The war in Ukraine, we're seeing that very, very much at the petrol pump, aren't we? That's one of the biggest influences that we're seeing. Russia is the second largest oil producer, oil exporter in the globe, and indeed, with countries around the world not wanting to buy from Russia, Russian oil supplies are being constrained. OPEC not picking up production. That's why we're seeing the price of petrol up significantly. But as I say, continue to watch the signals. While we're seeing $2.21 at the pump, will it be that sort of level? Will it be higher at $2.50, or will it get back to $2? A lot really depends on the war in Ukraine. So now is the time to be alert but not alarmed. Watching all the indicators come through. I'd like to be able to provide the answers for you. I'd like to be able to say the war is going to end tomorrow. I'd like to be able to say supply chain issues are going to end tomorrow. So work on the principle of that. But not even the Reserve Bank governor is saying that at the moment. The Reserve Bank governor, the one word that he's using a lot is uncertainties. He's saying there's uncertainties in terms of oil prices, the uncertainties in terms of supply chains, uncertainties in terms of our own economy, about how quickly the workers are going to return from overseas, the migrants come through and provide the labour for our economy. So certainly we are seeing a lot of pressures at the moment at the petrol pump in terms of consumers. So it's not just the war, but it's the supply chain issues which are pushing up the cost of a whole range of different items. And yes, that provides a degree of challenge for individuals which are out there. So certainly that's the so what coming out from the war, the impact in terms of the petrol pump. Ourselves at Commsec, we do a report on the petrol price each and every week. A lot of people say, why do you focus so much on petrol? Well, we answer basically because it's the single most important purchase, or the single biggest purchase that you make every week. A lot of people say, no, that's not the case, it's food. Well, food, there's a lot of items in your shopping trolley. It's not just one item. But in terms of petrol, if you go to the petrol station, you could be paying $60, $70, $80 to fill up your car with petrol. So it's the single biggest purchase that most people make. And of course that affects their spending behaviour. If you're paying more at the petrol pump, you're saying, well, perhaps I'll cut back my trips to the cafe or to the restaurant. Perhaps I won't get that new outfit. Not a lot of men say that, but a lot of women tend to say that. We'll cut back on that new outfit. So you might cut back on perhaps your trips to the pub or whatever it happens to be, the gents in the room. But it does have knock-on effects in terms of what we buy around there. We've always got to remember, when we ask that so what question, we drill down and say who is affected by that, who are the winners and who are the losers. We're mindful of the environment, we're mindful of our own business and the individuals that we're working to, and in the construction game, that's super important because you want to know how the people that you're working for are feeling and doing in terms of the current environment. Now, it's all about interest rates, isn't it? It all gets down to interest rates. People want to know, when are interest rates going up? Well, in our view at the Commonwealth Bank Group, we've come out with a prediction that the first interest rate hike will happen in June. The Reserve Bank Governor is not convinced. He's saying, look, we're just going to continue to watch things each and every month, and then we'll see whether the signals here line up that we can start to lift interest rates. He wants to really go for growth. He wants to push the envelope as much as possible. What he would love to see is everyone in Australia who wants a job can get a job. And that's what he's focused on at the moment. He said if we put up interest rates too early, that may not be the case. We might see some businesses not wanting to hire new staff. So he's holding off as long as possible to be able to lift interest rates. And indeed, that's a very, very important point. So what do we need to be focused on if we think interest rates are going to rise? The jobless rate. On Thursday we'll get the latest figures, and what we could see in terms of the jobless rate is that we could see a figure below 4%. You know, the monthly records have been going since 1978, and we haven't seen 4% or below 4% in that period of time. So it would be quite remarkable if this coming Thursday we saw a 3.9% jobless rate. And that's what the Reserve Bank Governor wants to see. What else does he want to see? He wants to see inflation sustainably between 2 and 3%. It's sitting at 2.6% at the moment, but it's taken 7 years for the underlying rate of inflation to get in the target band. We're only just inside the target band at the moment, and that's why the Reserve Bank said, look, there's no rush. There's no rush. We can take our time in terms of lifting rates because we're only just in the target band. He said, look, there's no guarantee that prices are going to continue to rise going forward because the supply chain issues may be solved. In fact, the war, may see some ceasefire or de-escalation, of the conflict. So there's a lot of uncertainties still out there. The other thing is wages. At the moment, the wage growth in Australia is around about 2.3%. Reserve Bank Governor said it's too low. He's on our side at the moment. If you're in the salaried workforce, he wants us to see us getting pay rises. Hopefully my boss is watching him and listening to him very, very carefully. Because I haven't had a wage increase for some time. I don't know about you. I must be doing something wrong at work. I must be in the naughty corner because certainly the dollars aren't flowing through to me. But what he wants to see is wage growth above 3%. So those are the indicators that you've got to watch to determine if interest rates are going to rise. Now I'm going to do something different today. Usually in terms of the economic presentations, you've got to wait until the end to be able to get the forecast. Here's the forecast already. So you haven't got to wait to the end. If you want to take your photos and take cameras and take photos of it, so you can. If you want to wait until the slides are available, you can do that as well. But these are the forecasts that we've got at the Commonwealth Bank Group. As I said, we believe that interest rates will start rising in June, and we'll see over the next year or so that we'll get up to around about 1.25%. From something like 0.1% at the moment in terms of the cash rate. So not super high interest rates, but a steady increase in terms of interest rates. And you've got share market predictions down there, you've got economic growth and inflation predictions down there as well. So hopefully they can provide a degree of guidance for you. Now I don't say, unfortunately I can't tell you with great certainty whether we're going to be correct. We're forecasting, just like every other banker, every other institution out there. We've got views about we think those three elements, inflation, wages and unemployment, are basically going to see the tick marks for all of them for rates to go up in June. But a lot can happen in a short space of time, and we've just got to watch out for these signals. Let's look a little bit further in terms of where things are going with rates. A lot of people say, look at the United States. Look how high inflation is in the United States. It's sitting at 6%. What the Reserve Bank Governor is again emphasising, he said, we're not the United States. We've got an inflation rate sitting at 2.6%, or the headline rate around about 3.5%. We are nowhere near 6%. So we don't need to see the same sort of increases that we're seeing in the United States. Now, Thursday morning our time, we may see the US Federal Reserve lifting interest rates by 0.25%. They're in a different part of the cycle. They've got real inflationary problems, sort of over there, and they need to start lifting interest rates. We're not at that point yet. That's what the Reserve Bank Governor has been stressing. But if you want to see where rates are headed according to the Commonwealth Bank Group forecast, there's the chart, on the right-hand side. In terms of prices and wages, we've got to remember that some things are going up in price. Things like, so the cost of building, and speaking to builders already this morning and talking about significant increases in costs that have come through. Hard to get labour, so hard to get the materials, and the materials costing more. The cost of petrol is going up, the cost of food is rising because of the higher cost of energy, so the higher crude oil price. But not everything is going up in price. And that's why it's important when you look at inflation, you look at different sort of measurements to be able to determine what's going on. Same in terms of wages. We've got one index called the Wage Price Index, which is the main measure of wages in Australia. But the Reserve Bank says we're not going to look just at the Wage Price Index. We're going to speak to business and find out whether they're passing on the strength in terms of the economy, in terms of lifting wages, what's occurring at the moment. He said, well, in the financial sector, you may be getting significant pay increases, but that's not happening right the way across the economy. So he wants to listen to business. He's interested in what you're thinking, what you're saying, what you're experiencing at the moment. So if you want to provide your degree of view, get on the phone or get on the email and just indicate to the Reserve Bank, this is what's happening in terms of our business, because they really are taking that information on quite significantly at the moment. The job market, I haven't said too much about it at the moment, but certainly we are seeing strong demand for jobs right the way across the economy. And of course, one of the major reasons is because of the borders being closed for some time. We haven't been able to get the workers coming to Australia, particularly in the cafe and the restaurant sector, the entertainment sector, getting the younger people migrating to Australia or travelling around the place and working here in Australia. But that is going to change. The borders are open now. The opportunity for businesses to bring more labour in is coming through. And again, that's another uncertainty. How quickly are people going to be able to come in from overseas? How quickly do they want to come to Australia to be able to work? We are seeing tight job markets right the way across Australia. So in the past we might have said, no, this is a Western Australian thing. Well, this is a New South Wales thing. It's happening right the way across the board at the moment. We're seeing strong demand for labour. And indeed there's a whole range of indicators that you can monitor to be able to see what's happening, particularly in your sector. You may be in the building sector, you may be in the cafe sector, you may be in the health sector. Go to the National Skills Commission's website. They will tell you what sort of pressures that we're seeing, what sort of skilled vacancies that we're seeing in certainly industry groups. There's so much information available to you nowadays that you're certainly you're silly if you don't use the information which is available that could be beneficial in terms of setting up your business. Let's have a look at the state of the nation. We do a report called State of the States. You may have seen that. So it's a couple of months old. So I thought I'd go to the latest figures, and that's the national account figures, and it shows you how the state and territory economies have performed over time. You can see that Victoria was in the doghouse for a long period of time because of their lockdown, but they're bouncing back quite nicely. And you can see that there's been divergent paths there over time, but just over the last couple of quarters, what we're seeing is all states and territories are basically converging, and we're seeing a bit more consistency in terms of the performance. So Tasmania is doing okay. The Northern Territory's improved. It's South Australia as well. So it's not just the big states. We're seeing an improvement occur right the way across the board. Our economy has been growing over the last 12 months, and a key reason for that has been the stimulus that's been applied by the federal government, the state governments, as well as the Reserve Bank. The focus of the governments and also the Reserve Bank is that they wanted to have people stay in their jobs. So people holding on to their jobs and businesses staying in business. And the good news is that strategy has worked. What we've seen is the Australian economy lifting quite significantly at the moment. And that's why we're having this discussion. It's a healthy discussion, a very positive discussion about whether interest rates are too low at the moment because we're doing so well as an economy. If we were not hearing that sort of discussion about interest rates, you'd be worried about our economy. You'd be worried about the fact that we've had all this stimulus and things are still not turning around. Well, the good news is that they are turning around. Households, families have been spending sort of money. Household balance sheets have been improving. Business balance sheets have been improving. So businesses have been spending money, consumers have been spending money, and that's why our economy is motoring along at the moment. As I say, why we're having this discussion about whether interest rates really need to rise or not. Let's have a look at the business sector. National Australia Bank, here's a plug for the opposition. National Australia Bank each month does a business survey. It's a very, very good survey, and I do encourage you to be able to look at that survey. There's also surveys by the ANZ on consumer confidence. There's Westpac on consumer confidence, the Commonwealth Bank in terms of household spending. All this information is being pumped out at the moment by banks and other institutions, and it's free of charge. It's not often that you can say that, is it? Free of charge. So certainly tap into the information which is available. What it's showing is that businesses have ridden the COVID waves over the last couple of years. And indeed, what we're seeing at the moment, the last indicator on that chart on the left-hand side shows that what we're seeing is at the moment is business confidence and business conditions are above the zero line and in line with longer-term averages. So most businesses are doing okay. Clearly, there's challenges. It's hard to get the staff that you need. It's hard to get the materials that are required. There's costs pressures out there, expense pressures out there. But that's highlighting the fact that our economy is doing well if we've got that demand element which is rising. One of the other things that we do at Commsec is when we've got the reporting season, the listed company reporting season, when companies are reporting their results, we look at every one of the ASX 200 companies. We add them all together in terms of a spreadsheet to be able to tot up how corporate Australia is doing in a macro sense. And the last figure that we've got in terms of cash levels shows you that Australian companies are sitting on a pile of cash at the moment. Indeed, companies are making money. They're paying out more in terms of dividends, not paying out a motcha in terms of dividends. They're holding on to some of it because there's so many uncertainties ahead. And because of those uncertainties, they're holding on to a degree of cash at the moment. Now, of course, everyone knows that if you're holding on to cash, you're not making too much money or too much return on it at the moment. So as businesses, we've got to be careful that we don't have too much degree of caution, that we are examining and exploiting the opportunities which are available to us in the current environment. But business balance sheets are in very, very good shape. What about household balance sheets? Well, if you were looking over the last 2 years to go on that trip to Europe, to Lebanon perhaps, to the United States, clearly you haven't been given that opportunity to do so. And overseas trips are not cheap, I'm told. If you haven't been travelling overseas, you've been saving perhaps $10, $15, perhaps $20,000 because you haven't been making that degree of sense. Where's that money gone instead? Well, some people say, look, I'll travel around domestically, but even with COVID over the last 2 years, that's been somewhat difficult. Other people say, look, I'll stay at home, I'll renovate my home and make the more comfortable for me working from home. But what we have seen is that people have held on to their jobs, income has continued to rise, they haven't spent like they have in the terms of the past. That's why we've looked at the Commonwealth Bank offset accounts, and you can see that they're basically gone through the roof. So saving levels have been rising quite significantly. Now the big opportunity is for individuals to be able to say, so what do I do now? Do I make that trip overseas now, or still do I wait a period of time? And that's something that if you're in particularly the hospitality area, the accommodation area, the travel area, that's very much in focus at the moment. What are people going to do with their money now that the borders are open and that people are able to travel? I understand even Bali's in, so in terms of the travel list, 300 people were on a Jetstar flight, so yesterday, so things are getting back to normal. One of the other things that we look at is, what are the normal costs, what are the essential items doing at the moment, and how much are they taking a share of our balance sheets? So you look at the essential items, food, clothing, alcohol, I think I'm right so far in terms of essential items. Tobacco's up there as well. That's basically just a longer run, sort of series. But if you look at those essential items as a share of our spending, they've fallen quite significantly. So people are concerned about the cost of living, sort of at the moment. That's true. Cost of living has risen, but a lot of these items aren't taking the same percentage of our balance sheet as in the past, and that's why people are very, very well placed in terms of their balance sheets to be able to continue to spend money in the current environment. Housing market, something that's probably near and dear to a lot, in terms of room, if you're builders or developers or in building materials. You want to know what's going to happen in terms of the activity going forward. So activity this year, certainly sort of locked in, and we're going to continue to see very strong activity in the building sector this year. Next year may be a different kettle of fish because interest rates, we believe, are going to start to rise in the next couple of months. Interest rates, sort of going up, less stimulus coming from the federal and state governments, and as a result, what we will see is a slowdown in terms of building construction much later this year and into 2023. Home prices have recently been going through the roof as well, but we have seen some inklings in particularly the Sydney market where home prices are starting to slow down. And these are our expectations about where home prices are likely to go in 2023 across the capital cities. We're not tipping a significant fall, we're tipping sort of more a correction in terms of the market from very, very significant highs. So if you've got children sort of who want to get into the market, there may be some opportunities for you to be able to grab over the next sort of few months and into 2023. But I do want to highlight the fact that the busyness in terms of the construction sector is not going to end anytime soon. It's going to remain busy this year. 2023 is when the slowdown is likely to come through. I am from Commsec, so you knew I probably was going to mention the share market at some point in the proceedings. And the good news in terms of our share market, despite what's happening in other parts of the globe, with the war in Ukraine, interest rates going up in the United States, our economy and our share market is holding up very, very nicely. So what we've done is looked at over 2022 which share markets have been rising, which markets have been falling, and clearly concerns about higher interest rates in the United States, concerns about the war, concerns about inflation have been weighing on share markets sort of in recent times. Our market's down by around about 4.5% since the start of this year, but it's still up around about 5% compared with 12 months ago. And remember, in terms of the share market, it's all about where the companies are making money and expected to continue making money going forward. Our view is the Australian economy will continue to grow. That will be a good environment for companies to continue to make money in this sort of environment, continue to record profits and continue to lift their cash levels. So we do believe the share market will get through this period of volatility and moving forward. One of the things that have been supporting the Australian dollar, as well as the share market in recent times, is the fact that raw materials and commodities have been rising in price. We've had iron ore prices, we've had oil prices, nickel prices, aluminium prices, wheat prices. They've all been rising in recent times. And it gets down to the fact that the rest of the world is living with COVID. They want to get back to normal, and they're doing things and the supplies aren't out there, and it's also due to the war. So when we're thinking about the Australian dollar, think about what's happening in terms of interest rates, both here in Australia and what's in the United States, and think about what's happening with commodity prices, particularly things like sort of iron ore and the like. But those higher commodity prices have been supporting our share market. We think that is going to continue, and we think that the Australian dollar, it's sitting around about 72 cents this morning, but has the potential to go higher rather than lower as we go through it over time and we start to lift interest rates. One thing that's occurred across the COVID environment is that we've seen a lot of different themes happen. A lot of people have reassessed what they do in terms of holidays, what they do in terms of jobs, their work attitudes, what businesses do in terms of the way that they sell items, those businesses that have been able to, particularly retailers, that have been able to sell goods online have done very, very well in terms of the current environment. People in lockdown, they've gone and say, look, so I need that new set of speakers from JB Hi-Fi. Let me get on the website. Next day that they're there, particularly in terms of Amazon, very, very quick in terms of turnaround years of time. But this is the new environment. A lot of people before COVID came around said, look, I'm a little bit cautious about buying goods online. Now, during the COVID period, people have dipped their toe in the water, like what they've done, and for a lot of families now, this is the way to be able to transact. So a lot of things have changed over time. What we've got to ask ourselves, particularly in business, is we've seen different attitudes come in over time. Are they going to continue to exist going forward? Are people still going to want to commute from far afield, from the Central Coast, from out west and down the southwest, or are they going to want to buy property in the inner city? In terms of their work attitude, is it still going to be 9 to 5 in the city, or are they going to work more in terms of home? We've seen those changes in attitudes. Is it going to change back now with the COVID environment? That's what we've got to monitor. That's what we've got to check very, very closely to see what themes are involved. We have seen a lot of regional areas do very, very well because people have said, no, I've given up in terms of the city. I want to sort of work, live and work out in the regional areas, particularly across the coast. That has certainly been a change in behaviour over time, but it may change again after the floods when people reassess where they're living up on the central and north coast and say, look, perhaps I need to reassess yet again about where I want to live and where I want to work going forward. This is the last slide. I find a lot of people tend to cheer up at this point of the presentation. I can never work out why, but I always like to say it at this point in time. Here's the outlook, and here's some of the things to consider going forward. It is not going to be an easy ride out of the living with COVID environment. Interest rates may rise. Supply chain issues will continue to exist. It's not going to be a seamless or a straight line process about how these things will evolve. But if we're on top of the issues, if we know what the issues are, we're continuing to see the developments over time, we're not going to get blindsided should there be changes in terms of the environment, such as interest rates lifting. Remember, it wasn't that long ago, 12, 18 months ago, when the Reserve Bank Governor was saying, 2024 is when interest rates are going to be rising. What has he been saying more recently? Well, it is a plausible suggestion that interest rates could be rising this year. In fact, they could be rising, June, July, August. So things can change in a very, very short space of time. The war, as I said, remember, it can either go, one way or the other. We could start to see a resolution. We could see a continuation of the conflict or an escalation of the conflict. But those are the sorts of things that unfortunately, I'd love to be able to give you the answer to this. I can't give you the answer. It's up to President Putin about, where we go from here. Supply chain issues, more and more people are getting back to work. Clearly, the producers would like to be producing more, so more workers, back at the workplace, pumping out, more goods. We'll start to see those supply issues ease. Australia, over the last couple of years, has done very, very well. This is gross domestic product or economic growth for a whole range of countries across the globe, and you can see that Australia is represented in the top couple of countries in terms of economic performance. One of the things has been because commodities, raw materials, have been very, very much in demand, and they will continue to be in demand because a lot of the countries, in terms of growth going forward, have been investing in infrastructure projects like roads and bridges and dams and the like, and that will continue to require raw materials, particularly in China. China is very much back in focus. Later today we'll see some latest economic data coming out of China, and we'll get some indications about how they're travelling. If they've still got some issues, still finding it hard to grow, we could see rate cuts and more stimulus coming out of China to be able to pump up their economy. And if you're in the commodity land, if you're in raw materials, certainly that's a major positive. A lot of information to digest today, some answers, some questions, but hopefully you will have found something new or different, or you'll be able to think about something new or different that affects your business going forward. As I say, it's all about the so what question. Economics is nice, in terms of a little bit of a chat, but we want to make it more practical and more useful. And the way you do that is to be able to say, how does this apply to me, my personal situation, my business situation? What should I be doing in terms of this environment? And I might leave it at that. Thank you very much.
What we'll do, we'll take some questions, and I'm sure Craig's got some time to provide some answers. So, does anyone have any questions? Joe, we've just got a microphone behind you.
Craig, thank you very much. You're right, there's a lot of information there to absorb. But a question for you, and maybe I wasn't looking as well as I should have. Just property prices. There's a lot of people in the construction industry here, right? And we've seen what's happening with property prices. A lot of prediction is that it could slow down next year a little bit, right? But what about the additional costs of construction? We're seeing this massive infrastructure activity on a global basis. The demand for commodities like steel, concrete, and so forth are going to continue to lift. I don't see that abating in the short term. So what's that going to do to prices, and what's that kick-on effect in terms of residential pricing?
Well, you're right. I mean, it gets down to supply and demand, doesn't it? Yes, it gets down to that sort of level of factor. Yes, so around the world, if there's businesses that are wanting to do things, individuals that are wanting to do things, they either pay the higher price, or they say, no, this is too expensive for me. Yes, so I've got to go sit on the sidelines for a while until things settle down. That's what's going to happen. Prices may choke off some of that demand, and the propositions which stack up the best will be those ones going forward. So I can't see it ending anytime soon. This is very much a global issue as well as a local issue. The good news is that barriers are starting to come down across the globe in terms of migration, in terms of workflow. So those areas of the global economy that are requiring workers in the biggest sense, they're going to see those workers coming through. The wage increases are going to be attracting those people through. So it is an issue, I think, that's not going to change anytime soon. We've gone through an amazing sort of environment where we're at war with the pandemic. Now we've got sort of war in the Ukraine, and these things don't end sort of abruptly on one day and then it's back to normal the next day. There's knock-on effects that sort of occur over time. So we do know in terms of stimulus factors in the local housing industry, there was a lot of government grants that have been provided to build homes, and that's why we're seeing a lot of activity this year. Bringing forward, if you like, of activity probably from future years. So with interest rates going up and some of that government grants sort of being more restrained, those government grants not continuing, we'll see demand pressures start to ease a little bit. So what we're seeing is cost pressures will remain fairly high, but we don't believe that they will continue to escalate in a big sort of way. The demand is picking up to meet supply is picking up to meet that higher demand.
Anyone got a question? We get a microphone to table 12.
Hi, Craig. I have a question about the war in Ukraine at the moment. Obviously, there's a lot of uncertainties at the moment, and I want to be an optimist, but things don't look good at the moment. So I'd like to know, worst case scenario, what will that look like for Australia?
I wouldn't like to think about a worst case scenario, and I am somewhat of an optimist as well. Overnight, so the European markets rose significantly. I think the German DAX was up over 2% on the expectation that we are having more concrete progress between the two sides, between Ukraine and Russia. But we do have sort of a significant aggressor in Ukraine, and we just don't know what's going on inside his mind. And that's the issue. We don't know what end game he's wanting to apply with these sorts of things. And you can get all the strategists, you can get all the experts, global geopolitics experts around the place. But so unless you know fully what's in the mind of President Putin, so you're not going to have the answers. So I suppose what we've got to continue to think of is scenarios. We've got to have in our own mind what we think is going to go on, what we think is going to apply, and sort of make our decisions the best way that we can. We're all in the same boat, if you like, sort of not just here in Australia, but across the globe. As you've seen in terms of the oil price, the significant degree of volatility can occur in a short space of time, depending on what happens in that war. We were seeing oil price, Brent price, at $139 a barrel only last week. Now it's sitting around about $100 a barrel. Of course, the $64 question is how quickly the fuel retailers are going to lower their price. Are they just going to be as quick as what they were lifting prices over the past week? We all know the answer to that one, so I haven't got to provide too much more in terms of that. But it can always go either way. Unfortunately, we don't have all the answers, and we'd love to be able to see inside the mind of Vladimir Putin, to be able to determine what's going on. But we just need to have scenarios made in terms of our own personal situation, our own business situation. When we think about the stock market, one of the things that we constantly say in terms of the stock market is don't put all your eggs in one basket and make sure there's a degree of diversification. When you think about businesses and your supply chain, you want to have a range of suppliers coming through to not be reliant on one supplier. You just don't want just one customer at the end of the day. You want to have multiple customers. So one of the things that we can certainly do stress, if the war has taught us anything, if COVID has taught us anything, is diversification. Having a sort of variety of sort of suppliers and customers out there has been super important in terms of our operations.
Any other questions? I've got one question for you, Craig. Talking about the biggest challenges I see talking to a lot of colleagues is fixed price contracts, increasing cost during that time, and then there's a long lag until you have to deliver that product or service. That's going to put massive strain on a lot of businesses moving forward in this current financial year, I would say for this calendar year. How do you see interest rates? And I think interest rates, if we're talking about interest rate rises, we're talking about a 1% over a period of time. How much really is that going to impact compared to realistically the other challenge that we've got, supply chain and the constraints that go on with fixed price contracts and the increases in costs that are astronomical at the moment?
Well, this is again one of these uncertainties that the Reserve Bank Governor likes to focus on. He said, when was the last time interest rates were effectively at zero? I mean, we're down to 10 basis points, which you could effectively call zero. When was the last time that occurred? Well, it hasn't occurred, so we're at record lows. So when interest rates start to rise, what sort of adjustment process are we going to see from businesses, from consumers and the like? In this current environment, people have taken on a lot more debt. If you've held on to your job and the money's still coming in, perhaps you've got wage increases as well, you've been able to take on more debt, particularly at super low interest rates. But when they start to rise, how prepared are you? The good news is that a lot of people that have had mortgages up until now, up until the last couple of years, have taken the opportunity to say, look, I can't travel overseas, I'll put it in my offset account, I'll put it into my mortgage, I'll pay down debt. So Australians are well ahead in terms of their loan repayments, and that's quite an encouraging thing. Those relatively new borrowers over the last couple of years that have taken on a little bit more debt, they're more vulnerable because they haven't got the same sort of fat to go back to. They haven't got the same sort of skin in the game. So that's the area of focus, I think, that we need to focus on. Those individuals and businesses that have taken on a lot more debt recently, how prepared are they for the future? And that's something the Reserve Bank Governor said, look, I'm not going to tell you when we're going to start lifting interest rates, it just depends on how things evolve over time. And he gets criticised for that. I mean, I would have thought that's a sensible thing for the Reserve Bank Governor to say. So look, we're not going to lift interest rates willy-nilly. We're going to basically see whether the circumstances warrant lifting interest rates. And we're not going to make knee-jerk responses. but we want to see more and more people in jobs. We don't want to see that threatened by interest rates going up too soon. But he said one of the things that we need to focus on in terms of where rates are going for in the next couple of years is in terms of people's response to these higher interest rates. And he did say recently, he said, people who have taken on loans, you've got to plan for the possibility or the eventuality that interest rates are going to rise. So do that now, make sure that you are planning, make sure that you are getting ahead, because there's plenty of notice out there for anyone sort of doing that. But we just don't know how these small changes in interest rates are going to affect individuals that have taken on sort of big borrowings. That's why he's not going to say, look, we're going to lift interest rates 1 percentage point over the next 12 months. That seems quite sensible to us. He wants to see what the impact is going to be over time. So we've made our predictions at the Commonwealth Bank. Certainly if you go to Westpac, NAB, ANZ, sort of Arab Bank, you'll get all the forecasts from them as well. Take the information, assess the information, look at the assumptions that are put in place. Then it's up to yourselves to be able to make your own judgment on the basis of those forecasts that come through.
Thank you. I've got a question from Joe.
Yeah, sorry. Another question for you, Craig, and thanks for the plug for the Arab Bank. If you look at all your measures and you look at comparing those to the rest of the world, right, individual countries and so forth, we're a standout. This country has actually coped with it extremely well, right? And we're on the path for good growth. We are AAA rated, right? A lot of people don't realise that is one of our greatest facets of going forward. Do you see that we'll maintain our AAA rating, and and what are the benefits of keeping that AAA benefit?
Well, certainly it's the federal government's direction that we'll continue to see improvement in terms of getting the budget back into balance and then starting to chip away in terms of that debt level. So certainly that's where the government is very much focused. Remember though, governments are driven by politicians. Governments sort of are driven by politics. So the upcoming budget in late March will be an economic document as well as it will be a political document. So we'll have to watch to see what the current government sort of does in terms of spending levels. Up to now, they've been very, very responsible. You go back 12 months ago, and we're sitting around about $200 billion in terms of a budget deficit, 10% of GDP. Today, it's $50 billion, or around about 2% of GDP. So it's improved significantly in a short space of time. It's done that because the economies continue to grow, and we've all continued to pay taxes, both businesses and consumers. But they've also shown some discipline in terms of expenses, and it's up to the government. If the government wants to continue to maintain a AAA rating, it's got to continue to act responsibly in terms of our situation and making sure that they're not putting spending or promises that are in place that can't be backed up in terms of our finances.
A question from Wally.
Thank you, Craig, for sharing valuable information. My question is to the federal election comes soon, and I don't wish to vote for any other political party, but let's say there's a change of government. How, from an economical perspective, what kind of changes are we going to see?
I always answer that question in a particular sort of way. The interest rates in Australia, who sets interest rates? Well, it's the Reserve Bank, isn't it? It's not the government, so interest rates setting still in the hands of the Reserve Bank. Share market, how does that determine? Well, it's determined by how our economy is faring and how the global economy is faring. It's not driven by the federal government or the state governments for that matter. Again, it's outside the politicians' control largely. What about the Australian dollar? How is that determined? It's determined by the marketplace, determining about the interest rate levels and a whole range of different things that go into that. What about fixed term interest rates, things like bond yields, swap yields? How are they determined? They're determined by the marketplace. So at the end of the day, I always ask the question, so what does the government actually do? It's a big question for a lot of people. Do they do actually anything? Well, they may have different sorts of policies for individual industries or sectors. So the Labor government may be different in that respect in terms of the way they treat the energy sector, the way they treat the property sector, the way they treat the superannuation sector. So watch the policies that come out of a sectoral or an industry basis coming out from both sides of politics, and then you'll know where the risks lie. But unfortunately, we're all being human. When an election's coming up, a lot of us say, the election's coming up, so I can't do anything for the next couple of months. I've got to wait and see the election outcome. That if you ask yourselves the question about what do they both stand for, what's going to change as a result, you shouldn't have to do that. You should say, it's business as usual. I'm going to continue to make money while my competitors are sitting on the sidelines, because I've assessed this information and I believe that the risks are low, that it's going to impact in terms of my business. And that's generally the way that I answer the question.
Thank you. So, thank you, Craig. I think there's anyone last question. I'll have to take last question, just mindful of time. Please, Danny.
Craig, you mentioned in one of the graphs that you're expecting a 3% fall and 9% fall in the next 2 years in house prices. Yet there are reports today in the paper saying we'll be 160,000 building short in the next 8 years or 7 years. And then we haven't opened the gates for migrants and overseas workers to come. How's that? What impact would that have on house prices?
Well, certainly factors will change. You've got to assess what happens in terms of interest rates. That's super important in terms of home prices. Supply of homes on the market. We're getting a lot of supply coming on this year in terms of particularly new houses rather than new apartments. But we've got a lot of new supply coming on this. That's why the building sector is so effervescent at the moment. Everyone's wanting to build things, and that supply will be coming on the market. That may mean that in 2023 we see less building activity, and if that continues to occur over time, we might see supply deficits. So we can only, in terms of forecasting, really look out 3 or 6 months, at the most, 12 months, with a degree of certainty. Watch the supply factors, watch what supply is going on into a particular postcode or a particular area, because that varies a lot over time. We're going to have macro factors like interest rates, but what we also want to focus on is not just Sydney or Melbourne or Canberra property prices. We want to know what's happening in Campbelltown. We want to know what's happening in Gladesville. We want to know what's happening in Balmain. And there's different supply and demand characteristics that will be going into each of those sectors. Particularly in terms of builders and in terms of developers, we need to go to a bit of more of a micro focus and say, I know what the macro factors are, but let's have a look and see what building is happening in a particular area. It could have actually become oversupplied. What we are seeing in Sydney at the moment is some home prices are already starting to ease. We're seeing that in eastern suburbs, we're seeing that in terms of the inner west. We're not seeing that right the way across the board. That's why we need to keep our focus on the individual region and postcode supply and demand factors.
Thank you. The ALCC wishes to express our gratitude to Craig for this morning for this time and insightful views. I'd like to invite the President, Samuel Nicholas OAM, to present Craig with a gift as a token of our appreciation for presenting today. Our next events will be communicated soon via the normal channels, and we look forward to seeing you at our future events. Thank you to Paul Signorelli and the Dalton House for their continued support. Finally, I'd like to thank our hard-working President and Board of Directors for their efforts. That concludes the formalities for today, but feel free to continue and mingle and engage with your fellow colleagues. Thank you very much.